Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forest. Thanks for joining us this week. I've got a conversation with Tomas Frymann. Thomas is someone whom I met through Nick Norris, who was on the podcast. And Thomas is a fourth-year doctoral candidate at Columbia University, and he's doing a lot of interesting research on integration and what that is and how you can measure it, and how this is part of the psychedelic experience, and of course making it all work for us. And it's great that maybe we can have a way of measuring it, or even having some sort of framework to work around that there could even be research, because it's a very hot term and idea, shall we say, in psychedelic circles right now, as it should be, because it's kind of like, how do you translate the experience itself into meaningful action and changes in your life, and therefore into the world? But it's also something that maybe is a bit mysterious, or can be approached in a variety of ways. So I think this kind of conversation you'll find valuable, and it's something that is being talked about a lot these days, and so I'm glad we're getting this up. I just want to say this podcast was recorded a bit ago, so apologies to Thomas for getting it up now, but we're getting it out. Not that really matters. All of these podcasts are essentially evergreen, and you're welcome, and I invite you to go back in time and to listen to any episode from, we're over 250 episodes now. I never thought that I'd be doing, I hoped I'd be doing the podcast weekly, but 5 years later, here we are, and I've been considering shifting it to bi-monthly, but I keep seeming to put it out 4 times a month. So for now, it's weekly. But I have other things that I get to share that I don't get to share on the podcast over on our council on Patreon. Like I just did this great live set at Treefort Music Fest for Radha's yoga class, and I put the entire improvised music set up on the Patreon, and I get to share demos there. And of course, we do our monthly council over there. So if you want to support the podcast or the project, that's a great way to do it. There's a variety of ways to do it depending on how much you want to give in proportion to your gratitude. Please check it out. It's patreon.com/eastforest. And the only other housekeeping I want to let you know, there's a bunch of things coming up, but the soonest thing is the Bottle Rock Festival. I'll be playing there. It's at the end of May. You can go to my website, eastforest.org, if you'd like to check out tickets and who else is playing and that kind of thing. And we're going to be back in Europe for a couple dates in June and August. Just a few dates, but in June I'll be in Ireland at the Beyond the Pale Festival. I'm excited to be there. Saw some friends playing there, including John Hopkins and Max Cooper. Both have been on the podcast. I recommend those episodes a lot. So getting back in the saddle for all that stuff. And also, Peter Broderick and I, our album Burn. So if you missed the live stream that we did on the winter solstice, it's going to be re-released. And the first portion of that is part of a big live stream fundraiser going on called Live on Earth, which is streaming April 17th through the 22nd. There's a whole bunch of different musical guests, from Ziggy Marley and Xavier Rudd, myself and Peter, many. There's lots and speakers going on. And Peter and I, we are going to feature part of that live stream, but it was completely recut, like the shots, but I also remixed and mastered the music. So it sounds great. It sounded good before, but it sounds really good now. And then we're going to re-release the entire 4-hour ceremony video on my YouTube channel, probably just after that. So stay tuned on social media or our email list. Maybe we can encourage folks to host their own listening ceremonies where we can use this thing, and maybe we can all ceremony together over the same weekend or something like that. We could put together something fun. So more on that soon. Stay tuned. I've been down in southern Utah now for a week and a half. I'm going to be here pretty much until Bottle Rock, and I've got work to do, of course. I'm working on the documentary, and I'm working on rehearsing, and I'm working on mixing some stuff for the next record coming out. But it's just been magical and very nourishing to be back down here in this incredible landscape. it's just let me just put out the obvious reminder for you and for all of us, for myself, that seeping yourself in nature is just great. It's great medicine. Just get outside. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't even have to be like you come all the way down to a place like this. Just get outside. Go for a walk. Take a little time to sit in repose and just look at anything. Look at a tree. I've had this bluebird that's been showing up every single day, every morning and evening. It sits on the clothesline and then it dive bombs the window and like pecks at the window. And I can't figure out what's going on. It's definitely the same bird every time. But obviously that's a really fun thing to watch. But honestly, just watching the wind pass through the trees and just take a moment. You know, those micro moments go a long way. In many ways, that's where the enlightenment lies. It's just in the breath or in between the breaths as you're washing the dishes even. But when you're in the reflection of nature, you see yourself in all that order and design and law. And it's where the magic is. So just putting that out there. But we're going to get into this conversation with our friend Tomas Frymann. All right, Tomas, thanks so much for taking the time, for hopping on. How you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Just got in from the Amazon from ayahuasca retreat at Temple of the Way of Light last night. So a little jet lagged, but doing good.
Yeah, I'm also a little jet lagged. I wasn't that far away. I was just on the East Coast. But Temple of the Way of Light, that place is old school. I mean, it's one of the... I've never been there, but it's a name that's been popping up in ayahuasca retreat centers for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. They work with the Shipibo tribe, and I heard about them through my research in New York, and I was just heard so many good things. And I've actually, part of the integration scale work we did was with the guys who worked there, and I was just like, man, these are really good people. I got to check it out. So,
how many people were in those journeys?
There's about 20 people per journey and 5 healers. It's actually a really good ratio. And then the way they work is the healers go sort of one-on-one with each person and sing an ikaro that's like super attuned to that person's energy state, which is something I hadn't experienced before, which is a super good way of working.
Cool. Well, before we dive into this, I know we're going to talk about integration and maybe whatever else, but maybe you could give a little bit of background about just kind of who you are and why you have anything to say about this.
Yeah, for sure. Tomas. I have been in clinical psychology for 7 years, just finished my PhD. And my research lab is spirituality and psychology at Columbia University. So I was working on scale development there. My dissertation project was creating a scale for interbeing identity, which is basically the sense of personal identity that often comes from a psychedelic experience where you have an ego death and you're like, oh wow, I'm just like one with everything, but also I'm my unique self at the same time. So that was my project, kind of looking at how we integrate mystical experience into a lasting form of personal identity. So through that project, I basically learned a whole bunch of the techniques for scale development, took scale development classes, just like learned about that process. And then I started doing work with Navy SEAL veterans through the organization VETS. And I worked as an integration coach there for 2 years. And that was after, earlier on, I worked at Rhythmia, the ayahuasca center, doing integration coaching there as well.
Okay. The vets, where were they? Were they just doing journeys on their own, or were they doing some sort of program that was providing psychedelic therapy?
Yeah. So the way that VETS works is it's a funding agency that sets up special ops forces veterans to go to other agencies. So they're sort of an intermediate. And they worked with this company called Mission Within, which does a combination of Iboga. On like Friday evening, we'll do Iboga, and then Sunday we'll do 5-MeO DMT. They do that down in Mexico. So I would go travel down with the veterans, and then beforehand do some integration prep calls, and then integration on the aftermath as well.
Yeah, I mean, Iboga and 5-MeO, it's like, are they intentionally trying to find really intense medicines because these guys are SEALs, and it's like they need a
They're
heavy hit
like, we
like
can
that?
take it, man. Yeah, they call it the nuclear option.
That's crazy. The Iboga is, as far as I know, largely for addiction work. Was it focused on that, or is it more PTSD or trauma?
Yeah, super interesting, right? Because I've also heard of it through addiction, but the way it started with the veterans was Marcus Capone, the head of vets, basically went down to Mission Within and had an incredible transformative experience with Iboga. And so I think it's usually been with the addiction communities, but it looks like with PTSD and anger and really so much. I actually did a Bwiti initiation in Gabon with Iboga, and a lot of the people there were females who had been abused. So there's a lot of different sort of conditions it works for. I think that the reason it had been with drug addiction is because it's such an intense medicine. So people really have to be kind of in a desperate state or pretty
Yeah.
radical individuals to enter that option.
What was your experience like with Iboga?
Yeah. So I started with Ibogaine. I went through the same kind of treatment protocol as the veterans, Ibogaine and then 5-MeO DMT. Um, and interestingly, it was really sort of gentle for me. Well, not gentle, it was extreme, but it was sort of welcoming. Like ayahuasca, I often feel this like, it's coming in. Like I can't do
Mhm.
anything. The tendrils just like work their way through my consciousness and body. Iboga felt like it was like welcoming me in, and sort of there's this like rocking energy going in my stomach. And then I could allow it deeper and deeper and deeper. And it was almost like giving me permission to do that.
Mm.
And then it just got really, really powerful. And I was having really like direct visuals that I never have had in any other. I've always had like kind of, patterns and stuff, but I could like really see things in front of me. And can be very confronting. So I was actually in my relationship just at a stage where I had a 4-year monogamous relationship and we were going into exploring polyamory. And so I was just seeing images of my partner like having sex with other guys for like hours and hours. And I was like, no.
Mhm.
But then it showed me like we're all one energy body. And it's like just like my left hand and right hand, like we're part of the same body, we're different, but it's okay. And then I actually kind of felt this like really deep sense of relief. And it's how it works often. I've heard with people who experience sexual trauma too, is like kind of just seeing this, what otherwise would be really difficult confrontational things, but from a different sort of manner,
Mm.
a different light. Yeah.
So, fast forward, did you and your partner bring the polyamory into the real world, and did it go as prophesized?
Oh, we are navigating it. We're we're still navigating. It was
He
really
always says, "Hey,
amazing.
we're all one. We're all one." It's like, I don't know. Is that going to be enough?
That's where
Um,
integration comes in.
yes,
No, but
yes.
it's been a super helpful kind of North Star to have had that experience. And of course, like, yeah, when it comes down to it, like she's had another partner for over a year, and that's been really, really difficult, really challenging. But it's given me this great sort of like point of reference to come back to. It's definitely helped me kind of navigate that experience. But it doesn't just
Wow.
give it to you. It doesn't just give you like, oh yeah, it's all gonna be good.
Yeah. So, integration, it's a big buzzy word in the psychedelic space right now, and I don't think that's, for any bad reason. It's sort of important to think that, are we just engaging in some form of spiritualized bypass by getting high and getting into these spaces that are really sometimes incredible, and trying to find ways to translate it into the real world, into action? But at the same time, because it's kind of buzzy, I often feel like it's almost overused
Mm,
lately. And I
mhm,
kind of wonder, um, like, well, sometimes, psychedelic experiences, they're beyond the mind in a lot of ways, right? And so
mm,
I do think it's important, of course, to bring it into your life actively.
mhm.
But I wonder how much of that happens naturally, or,
Yeah,
it's just inherent to mystical experience.
yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it'll be super interesting to look at the data as we go. So we have an integration engagement scale, which is like how actively are people sort of involved in the behaviors associated with engagement or with integration. And then we created also an integration experience scale. So how much are people feeling that their journey has really become a part of their way of life and their experience? So just a preliminary thought as you say that is we could look at over time how correlated is the engagement with the experience. Are there people who are really low on the engagement scale, but they're still having the experience of integration? Then it might just be happening unconsciously. And I think, of course, like it's always going to be both of those. Like there's the whole unconscious level that the medicine is working on, and that's going to hopefully, find its way into life. But
Hmm.
it's certainly going to be there in the body. And whether people kind of like pay attention to that signal or attune to it, I think seems to be kind of like a kind of critical variable. But
Well,
yeah.
what do you think are some of the most effective techniques to have integration work from these experiences? Or conversely, what do you think's primarily
Mm,
missing from
yeah.
approaches?
Yeah. What I've seen is sort of valuing integration is a really, really important variable. So I feel like some people come in and they're like, I am so ready to receive this, to honor it, to change, and I'm going to do what it takes. I'm really going to commit myself to honoring what the experience has brought up. I feel like some other people might come in and just kind of have maybe a different mindset of like, oh, this is like Western medicine. Like you pop a pill and it does it for you. And that's not really the case. So I think just having sort of an accurate mindset that about how it works, that really I have to bring myself to this experience. And then also the motivation to do that seem to be really, really important.
Well, in ketamine therapy, for instance, the model there over the years has largely been that it is like a medicine you're coming in to get. And the clinics primarily have been focused on giving you a medicine. Like
Hmm.
we are the doctor, so we are going to inject you with the thing, and
Hmm.
that's what we do.
Hmm.
And when I got introduced to this through my partner, who became a ketamine therapist,
Hmm.
I went into the clinic, and early on, this nurse anesthetist came in and shot me up with the thing, and he just leaves. And thank God she was there because I instantly it was like DMT. I just went into like really intense space, and I
Hmm.
was surprised. I didn't, that was my own naivete. But afterwards, I was kind of angry at not her, the clinic,
Hmm.
because it's like, do you guys realize what you're doing here? Like, this is extremely vulnerable, emotional, spiritual place. And
Hmm.
if you're not holding that container, what happened to me, and I'm a guy who's had some experiences and skills. I have a lot of skills and I struggled. So I was
Yeah,
like, what about the person who's never had any experience? And this could be traumatizing. So I talked
absolutely.
to them about the North Star Pledge and sort of just kind of doing what I could to sort of encourage them to think about holding people through this. But there is an attitude in some circles about it being more of a pill in a sense, and
Hmm.
I've always thought that maybe with ketamine, as an example, it does provide these medicalized benefits. Maybe it really is like there's a chemical thing going on with depression and anxiety. I feel that there is, but it's absolutely tied to and part and parcel with the spiritual, the
Hmm.
journey. That's part of why it's so powerful for me and allows me to make changes in my life because of that side of it.
Hmm.
And so ignoring the ceremony or ritual aspect is really what I'm getting to, can be a bit of a blind spot. I think in the underground, it's been around for the whole time, but in this medicalized therapeutic world. So, I suppose, how do you integrate an experience if you don't acknowledge the spiritual
Mm.
aspect of it? And I would
Yeah,
imagine your scale or the system you're working on with integration, does it really value or the spiritual or mystical aspect, or is it
yeah.
not? Is it more secular?
Yeah, yeah. That's a really good question. It's hard to navigate different people's sort of preferences. So the way that the scale development happened is basically we create a massive array of different items related to integration and then feed those into people with a lot of different backgrounds. So people who are in the research world, people who are underground facilitators, people with indigenous roots, and kind of look at the amalgamation of what different items those people are saying are kind of important facets of integration. And then trying to kind of cover the whole space of what does it mean to integrate from all these different lenses, but in a way that doesn't pigeonhole it into like, what if somebody has this type of experience? Oh, they have to have integration via drum circle or something. It's like, well, no, not everyone's going to do drum circle integration. So broad enough that the kind of general principle of integration and connecting the nature of the journey to one's life is captured, but then also specific enough that you're really looking at, did somebody capture all these different facets of it? So you kind of try to tiptoe between those two
Yeah.
worlds. But yeah, I think, what you're saying about ketamine treatment and the medical model and the whole like integration starts before the journey has begun, in terms of you're setting your mind, body, temple up to receive these in a certain way, to relate to it in a certain way. And how you carry it forward after that is definitely going to depend on how you've set yourself up beforehand. And I think that's a large part of the value of ceremony and ritual, is preparing the mind, preparing the body. And there are things that there is some work out there in like traditional psychology about the value of ritual and ceremony. But I feel like because of our sort of wholesale sort of rejection of religion in a lot of ways, because, there's definitely problems associated with religion. And then our secular world kind of is like, all right, that's all going out. We've sort of neglected some of the
Yeah.
value of those really important components.
Well, let's get into it. Like, what are some of these components? Like what are some things people could try? If there's a lot of folks I hear from who are talk about this stuff, but I think there's a question about like, well, what do I do
Uh-huh. Yeah.
to integrate or to honor these experiences that I'm having?
Yeah, totally. So just on the topic of honoring, I think like really looking at where they're coming from. And that could be in a cultural context. So like, what is the lineage associated with a particular medicine or plant, and how did they approach it, and what do they do, and trying to sort of respect some of that. And then also looking at nature, it's like, oh, to honor the experience, for example, at the Temple of the Way of Light and in the Bhuti initiation I did, in both of those cases, you're preparing yourself by bathing in plants, like plant baths and flower baths. I was like wearing a crown of plants for the whole time during the ceremonies and the Bhuti initiations. And those kind of rituals are putting yourself in touch with the broader context of nature. So you can see, okay, like I am nature. I'm wearing nature. I'm bathing myself in nature. I'm ingesting nature. And this is connecting me to what this psychedelic experience is conveying in terms of the dissolution of separateness in so many ways. Like we've separated ourselves so much. So I think exactly that word honoring is a big part of kind of integration and thinking about, yeah, what are some ways I really like kind of approaching it from like what genuinely authentically resonates with someone. Like how did they honor nature? What is it through the ocean? Is it through eye gazing with animals? Is it through being in touch with their dogs? Like what are the ways that we can honor the source of these experiences, and then kind of carry that forward, those lessons forward into life. So I think there's so much to say. Kind of
Yeah.
went down one tangent, but that's one part to start, I guess.
Yeah, and that's like kind of a broader energy that I can appreciate. Maybe I'm just trying to pin down if there are like I'm still trying to think about the doing. That's just how
Hmm.
some of
Hmm.
my mind goes.
Cool.
And is that
Yeah.
are you pushing back on that because it's like, well, that's too reductionist in a sense to just say like, are you saying in essence
Yeah.
it's the opposite of that? It has to be self-directed in a way and
Mm.
more creative or broad or artistic.
Um, I guess I was just starting there because the word you used, honoring, kind of cued
Yeah.
that for me. And I think it is important to have that mindset kind of before you get into the really concrete doing things, to look at, okay, like what's my internal state and how am I approaching this in a really broad
Right.
way? When it gets down to the very like kind of practical element of doing, how we broke down that sort of category of engagement was into reflection and application.
Mm.
So reflection would be, how am I processing what came up? Like, what were the symbols? What were the emotions? At what point in my journey did that spike of emotion come up? What was that related to? When do I feel that in my daily life? What is that telling me? What is the message and wisdom of that emotion? What does it mean that my whole view of self and reality got toppled over? How does that connect to what I do with my work, what my relationship, my partnership? So many different aspects of reflection that can kind of start to move and translate some of these things. And then the application part is, okay, so I understand this whole sort of like map of what the journey was conveying to me. Um, how do I actually make behavioral choices that are aligned with what that was showing me? So how do I greet my doorman? Or like one of my recent
Doorman.
journey,
Oh man.
if I'm thinking about being in New York,
Oh, okay.
not my personal house.
If the average person has a doorman,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
that's a
And it's just a
euphemism.
common
Yeah.
problem, you know?
Yeah.
No, but yeah, like in New York, I remember walking in and out of my apartment all the time, and there's the door guys there. And it's like, oh, do we take a minute to like,
Not in Brooklyn, bro. Yeah,
oh,
not when
yeah,
I was
that's
down
true,
there.
that's
I'm
true.
kidding. I'm kidding. Well, I totally hear that. Is there anything? A lot of that feels like things you're sort of discursively thinking about in your head. What about more of a somatic body
Mm,
approach to integration? Where
yeah,
I think a lot of to get out of actually that headspace, because the mystical experience is often it transcends the mind. That's what makes psychedelics so confounding and integration so difficult, is that you have experiences that, in it, you draw a circle on this paper and you're like, that's the answer. And in that experience, it means it is the answer. Makes
yeah,
total sense. You come back down to the three-dimensional reality and it's just a circle on a piece
yeah.
of paper. And you're like, well, my mind, it's like I'm looking at a circle. Um, so I'm trying to think like, where's the bridge
Mhm.
from the numinous into the three
Mm.
dimensional? That to me is in some ways what integration is.
Yeah, totally, totally. I think that's a really great point. Um, and I'm a kind of heady person often, heady point in my life too, like working in the research world and just actually trying to transition into a little more embodied way of life. But we definitely tried to incorporate some of that into the scale. Like one of the items is because of my experience, I've prioritized my overall wellness. Um, or I've made healthy life choices for myself because of my experience. So making a healthy life choice could be expressed through the embodied practice of surfing or dancing, or making a healthy life choice could be what food I eat or how I meditate, or whatever it is. So I think, yeah, definitely so much of this is carried in our body and our environments and our physical connection to our environment. I think that's a really good point. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of things out there like doing collage work or like using art as a
Hmm.
mechanism for divinity to speak through to you?
Yeah, definitely. That's something I don't have like a lot of practice in. I'm still at the stick figure stage, and
Mhm.
I like just kind of, even without any skill, using art as a means. It was actually mind blowing. I did one art therapy sort of like workshop, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I wrote down on this picture like, man finds his sense of aliveness again, or something. It was like the art therapy practice was like, write a small little sort of like news headline and then like kind of draw some things related to that.
Mm.
And just drawing and engaging in art, I was like, oh my God, like I feel alive again. Like I forgot this part of myself. So I think it's incredible way, and taking all the, so much nonverbal richness in imagery and in expression and color and all those things. So it's also a great, on a really practical level, I think the use of art can remind us or cue us or kind of create that bridge, as you were saying, back to the experience. And then if you have that art as a reference, you see it in your life, or, for me, I have this um, necklace here that's like a little piece of art, and it's just like an eye with a rock, and it reminds me of the perspective that like the universe is always with me, like God or the creative force is always there expressing itself through me and my surroundings, and as such I don't need to be lonely or feel ever like I'm on my own, because it's always there. And that's a through art. Like I could write that out, but it wouldn't be as powerful.
So what are like in the work you're doing on your PhD, and you kind of created a scale or sort of like is it sort of a way of measurement so that you can evaluate integration amongst disparate groups who go through journeys?
Yeah, so the integration scales, some of the intention of creating those, is basically pretty much primarily to just show presumably the importance of integration. And we just published a scale, so we don't actually have data on the implementation in research trials. Um, but that's kind of the main question that they're answering, is like, how important is integration? So just addressing that question, and then from there, given that the research shows that integration is important, that could work its way into our formal systems. So let's say we have insurance coverage eventually of psychedelics as a mental treatment.
Right.
How much value is put on the integration component of that could be very much based on what the data are. Uh, yeah.
But just having therapy after a session or working with someone to help parse it out, again, like let's say if you're not even looking at it from a soul or spirit or divinity perspective, but just your subconscious or your unconscious, like a Jungian perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to, it's like working with dreams. We're trying to decipher and be in communication with that zone of from those other aspects of our consciousness, and that does sometimes take uh, you have to have an open mind to kind of work with that, and we can often get stuck on our own with experiences. I mean, frankly, like some experiences can be somewhat traumatic or
Mm-hmm.
destabilizing because they're so powerful or so big that
Yeah.
you're like, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
I've had a couple experiences in my life that I've never kind of made sense of with my head, and
Yeah.
they were deeply destabilizing.
Yeah.
It certainly changed behavior, and I don't understand why that happened or what I was supposed to do with that. All I know is it happened.
Yeah.
Um, and how have you learned people are to approach that which is confounding or feeling traumatic?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a big component, actually. So we have broken down the experience of integration, that whole scale, into three domains. One of those domains is feeling settled. So I kind of see that as one of the first kind of major components of coming back. Like, are the emotions back to baseline, or is some of the just the stir and the ripples that are caused by the experience starting to settle? Um, and it's hard to settle. I think that element is particularly relevant when you have a really destabilizing, shaking, intense emotional experience. Um, Something that has helped. I had that just a couple days ago,
Oh yeah.
um, and it really helped me to notice how my thoughts were creating destabilizing realities or stabilizing realities. And I was noticing actually live how that was happening. I had one journey in which the sort of message to me was like, ayahuasca or psychedelics only happen through my awareness. My awareness is this channel through which it goes and then shows itself. So originally, like, ayahuasca was coming on as these really like scary tentacle like sort of images, and just like kind of monstrous in a certain way. But I recognize like, oh, that's just like my fear, and then sort of a visual representation of fear. And I kind of like conjured the awareness of myself to say, I want to experience this in a beautiful way. And I felt this power of like kind of concentration and focus. And suddenly it was beautiful. It was amazing. And then later, a couple ceremonies later, I had that really, really intense sort of ego dissolution from branching off from a state of terror, pretty much. Like my journey started with encountering Chucky, the doll, uh,
Ah, okay.
which was actually really amazing. Like I encountered Chucky, and then I was like, oh
Did
man, like
Chucky have communications for you?
he did. I mean, it was sort of a one way. He wasn't saying anything, but I was witnessing the energy of fear and violence through this manifestation of that, basically. And I was noticing, like, oh, like what was coming to me was like, you're just really afraid, and like you just need to be loved. So I was just like sitting there with him. It's like, Chucky, it's okay, man. Like you don't need to kill people. Like you just want to be loved and
Trying to bring
held.
Chucky into the light.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
How
So
do you integrate that? Like, what are you supposed to do with Chucky
yeah, yeah,
in
yeah,
ayahuasca?
yeah. I felt like so the temptation to destabilize there is reacting to the emotion that came up, which is fear, and I could feel these undulating waves of myself reacting and then being peaceful and reacting, being peaceful. And a lot of it was like I could bring myself back through mindfulness, but my mindfulness wasn't really powerful enough to persistently be there. And I would start to get afraid of fear, and then the fear would sort of expand and become violent and disturbing. And I would see my emotions sort of destabilize and unsettle. And then kind of looking at, okay, what is my mind doing as I witness fear? And what are the narratives I'm telling myself? And how do those narratives then populate into a new stage of the next reality? So as I witness Chucky and I maybe say like, oh shit, like fuck this. I don't want to see Chucky here and now. Like get out of here. Like that is almost exactly the message that makes Chucky Chucky. Like people are rejecting him. People reject fear. People reject that state of emotion and try to confine it and box it and push it away. And it expands and expands and gets worse and more horrific. And so just noticing like, okay, what helped me settle was trying to sit with that and be with it and just like notice, okay, what are the stories I'm telling myself? And ultimately, I think so much of integration gets back to basically the golden rule of religion or oneness, right? Is like, if we view ourselves from the vantage point of oneness, how would we behave and how would we encounter these things? From the vantage point of oneness, like I am Chucky too, like not literally or not even sort of metaphorically that the state of fear exists in myself, but I, as the universe, which has created all things, exist through, well, Chucky's not a literal person, but I exist through every literal sort of manifestation of consciousness as that force. And so to sort of align our behavior, I think is basically the golden rule. It's like, okay, when we align ourselves with our divine nature, to me, that's really integrating. Um, yeah, so I kind of see that as a way to settle and then start to make meaning of these emotions. Like, oh, this emotion is telling me something, and maybe kind of being patient in that process. Like, it's not going to come up right away. I can't force a meaning out of it. I can be curious, and eventually something may arise. That's kind of been the case, I think, in a lot of ways.
So
Yeah.
I may hear about loving Chucky in the experience in a way, recognizing that there's no separation, and so being afraid of Chucky, I get that. But
Mhm.
afterwards, being curious, of course. How are you creating the invitation though for it to speak to you? For the, what are the opportunities that are actually created so that you can be curious and have something to be curious to?
Yeah. I think the people you surround yourself is one opportunity of like how to sort of generate that state of curiosity. Like, are you surrounding yourself with people who are going to be reactive and defensive and judgmental towards the things that came up? So let's say, you have this really scary experience of murder and violence. And then you're in a community that says like that's the devil and that's because you engaged with the devil's work, and it's like, oh, okay, that's not helping me really settle or bring peace to this. And then I think internally you can generate that state through awareness as well, basically meditation, and just seeing, okay, as I witness the stories and their effect, I can actually have a little bit more sort of mindfulness in how I conjure those things. Super easy for things to just get off track when you create stories that create stories that create stories that amplify things, and the unsettledness grows. I think kind of coming back to the baseline through concentration is a really powerful practice for that kind of settling and curiosity state.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just thinking again about my own experiences in the past, the handful that were really, even to this day,
Mhm.
it's more like the weight of it or the intensity of its reverberation dies down, but it's still sort of a question mark. If
Yeah,
anything, just showing me how little I understand in my
yeah,
mind
yeah.
about this space. And a lot of times when you walk into an experience with intention, it to me is the other side of integration, and it brings deep meaning inside the experience. Anything that happens inside the journey, I have something to rest it against or put a picture frame
hmm
around it so that it now has meaning.
hmm
So what would you say is the equivalent of that after the journey?
Yeah, I love first that you kind of bring that as like the intention helps frame the integration, because I think that's really really true. It's like, okay, I came here. You tap into your heart, like, what is the reason I'm here? Maybe it's just have fun. Cool, then I'm gonna have fun. And okay, I came with the intention to have fun. I
That's
had a
probably
horrible
not
time.
that's probably not. Every time I hear that, I'm like, "Let's dig a little deeper."
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly
I
right.
just came to relax,
Yeah, it's
I'm
so
like,
relaxed.
"Okay, why?" You know?
And often, so yeah, where I was going with that is often you
Mhm.
don't have fun, depending on the
Right.
substance. Maybe you take MDMA at a festival and you want to have fun, you're going to have fun. Good, you know, good time. But if you come to ayahuasca, let's say, and you're like, I just want to experience joy, often you're going to have some pretty hard struggles. Um, but like you said, you can frame those struggles against your intention. I wanted to experience joy, peace, and love. Oh, and then I got smashed with like sadness and anger and hatred. But you can look at them like, what is the relationship between those things? How is my sadness, anger, hatred, whatever, interfering with my states of joy, and where are those things coming from? And so I think that can create a lot of like kind of I think the term is like grist for the mill, right? In the aftermath is like sort of you can take those experiences and say they're meaningful relative to what I was bringing in here. Yeah.
So what do you want people to take away from this sort of research and work you've been doing on
Mm.
integration?
hmm Yeah, I think one huge thing is just the takeaway that integration is important, and hoping to um, kind of bring some empirical validation to that so that it can be worked into our broader systems. Like, I really want to see a future world in which psychedelics are treated differently than the medical industry kind of treats our prescription medications right now. I really hope it doesn't go that path, and that integration, nature, spirituality, ceremony, like all these things are valued. But our systems speak in the language of data and empirical analysis. So we have to translate things through that language, basically. So that's one really major thing. The second thing is I think the integration skills actually help prompt reflection. So when people are engaging with it and they're like, okay, I've given myself mental space to reconnect to the experience. That's one of the first items on the
Yeah.
on the scale. Reflecting, oh, have I done? Oh no, actually, I just went back to my 14-hour corporate job, and I have no mental space. Um, Maybe that's a critical factor for why a lot of the things have been blocked out or pushed down or not translated. So I think it's really cool that in engaging with these items, people also have the opportunity to reflect over time on how their process is unfolding, basically.
I'm sure I would say that fundamental step is to create the space to listen at all. Otherwise, there or just whatever you want to call it. But I, I I suppose I started this by saying a natural process, but even in that way, you have to give time for repose or reflection, which is really not something done very often today, because we are able to distract ourselves almost every minute of the day if we want to, quite
Yeah.
easily, with things like
Yeah.
podcasts and
Yeah.
everything else. So
Yeah.
you have to create space for those tender aspects to be heard. I
Yeah.
suppose there's myriad ways to do that.
Yeah. So actually, right now, I'm in a week of silence. I interrupted it because I'm like, "You're the best. I got to do a
How
podcast."
dare you? Yeah.
um, but yeah, that's part of my integration process right now is taking a
Mm,
week of noble silence so that I don't have even the verbal channel sort of interfering with the emotional and kind of like deeply felt takeaways from this
yeah.
experience. And then another thing I'm doing is just taking what three 1 hour chunks. So 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. I'll be on my phone and computer, and the rest of the day just have them turned off. So I think those are huge factor. And it was so wild being out there in the Amazon and just recognizing like, oh my gosh, we none of us had phones or computers. We felt like family within 10 days. And I was just like the accelerated pace of belongingness and social connection, which is such a remedy to our basically global pandemic of loneliness and isolation. It's like it's incredible how letting go of our technology and our phones and our computers and distractions can so easily create a remedy to this huge problem that so many people experience.
It's a simple approach, but a tall order.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
given how embedded we are with technology in our lives, anything from checking the weather to communications to booking travel to maps, all the ways, as we know,
yeah,
that, uh, but it's it just keeps going back to flowing with our natural patterns.
yeah.
It's like a less is the more. That is a difficult thing to really be like, well, maybe there's another way.
Yeah,
You can always
yeah.
try the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of speaks to the second, like the harmony flowing with our natural patterns, I think is the, in our scale, the second domain. So there's feeling settled and then harmonized is the second one. I feel like when you tap into the psychedelic state, it's tapping you into what your natural sense of like attunement is and nature and the pace of nature and getting connected with that. I feel like that's super, super important part
Is
of it.
there a third level, or is it just those are the two primary levels of your scale?
Yeah, so we had settled, harmonized, and improved was the third domain there. So improved being kind of the natural output of taking awareness and applying it to your life should be basically the experience of the benefits of that sense of harmony and settlement and translation.
Well, I'd imagine, for everyone, this takes a bit of experimentation. That curiosity comes from maybe the energy of like you try things and
Yeah,
see where it goes.
totally, totally. And I think that's a big part of it too. Like not every piece of every part of integration is going to work for everyone, you know. And I've been experienced this with meditation where there's kind of a big message out there like you should meditate to be better, you know, to and then for a long time I was like approaching meditation this way. And then I listened to Alan Watts kind of just talk about meditation as like allowing yourself to do it, allowing your mind not to run away and enjoying that. Thich Nhat Hanh kind of approaches it in a similar way. That's really transformative for me. It's like, oh, if I want to think, I'll think. That's okay. I'll just notice how it impacts me. Oh, I don't really want to think. Come to the
Yeah.
breath. That sounds good.
I was talking to Robert Thurman a couple days ago at the Ram Dass retreat, the Buddhist scholar, and
Uh-huh.
he was saying that a better translation of the what we call mindfulness, but what we're translating from, he says it's better, it would be more accurate to call it remembering, is what the word is.
Mm,
And I, I, I don't know why, but that feels a lot more welcoming to me than
mm,
mindfulness.
mm.
And it's just sort of this idea of continually remembering, and
Yeah.
I don't know, it feels less
Yeah.
punitive or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that that element of just authentic enjoyment is like such a big part of it and something we don't have explicitly in the scales, but I think will be really interesting to look at. Like, let's say in the research, the variable of how much did you really want to do this aspect. So let's say finding supportive people to talk about your integration with, like, is that something you really wanted to do? Do you really want to talk to people? Are you an interpersonal person? Does that fill you up with joy to talk to supportive people? I think that's a really important sort of like mediator to all of these different facets of integration. It's just it being heartfelt and authentic.
Totally. Well, yeah, it's a big subject, but it seems like a giant art piece. There's lots of ways to approach it. Is there anything else you'd like to add on this subject? I'm sure you just got a PhD in it, so you're like, well, yeah, but that would be germane to our conversation.
Right. I think the only thing I'll add is, to me, integration is like the interbeing component, which is a term from Thich Nhat Hanh, is so huge to the state of psychedelics and the way that I've witnessed over the years. Basically, aligning one's personal life with oneness at large, or interbeing, to me is like such a crucial element of how we integrate. And that happens in so many ways. Are we honest and authentic in our relationships? Are we eating food that is sourced from ethical places? Are we opening our eyes to even looking at the food and where it comes from and the documentaries and things? Are we spending money in a way that aligns with the nature of oneness and identifying as all beings? Basically, like, how that to me is like the really, really central facet. And then looking at, that's not just for ourselves, that is the ultimate nature of reality. Like, and having a deep dive into the nature of self, like, who am I? That age old inquiry. And going from there, the kind of languaging that I found helpful for myself to wrap my head around this is thinking of the universe as progressing through space in the same way it does through time. So you could unpack this for a long time, but really simply, you could say it's really natural for us to think that moments progress through time. In other words, I sort of like bundle up my lifespan of Thomas into this sort of like timeline. And I think, oh, like, here I am. And moments are progressing through time as I talk. But I isolate my timeline from your timeline and don't really think that moments progress through space, because in my brain, it's only processing sort of like a localized area, and I only have episodic memory access to myself here. But if we sort of ask ourselves, what is it like to be the universe itself? The universe is being me right now. And in being me and the specificity of me, it's sort of not being you, because the specificity of being me is not being you. But it's also you in this exact same moment. So to be you, it has to not be me, in a sense. So we could think of basically the universe as individuating into one localization of consciousness, and then actually sort of like leaving that localization to travel through every instance of consciousness wherever it happens in space. Almost in the same way you could say it progresses through time is progressing through space. And when we tie ourselves to that identity, which sort of moves through space and time, and then align our behavior, our experience with that sort of way of thinking, to me, that's at least my personal sort of like approach to what integration means on the deepest level. And a lot of that comes from Thich Nhat Hanh's work on interbeing. There's also a philosophy called open individualism, or Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism. Alan Watts' works talks about this in different words. So I think just the kind of like metaphysical component there is super fascinating, and how that ties into our actual daily life, kind of bridging those two things.
Fair enough.
Cool.
So if people are interested in, I don't know, exploring this into its deeper waters, or connecting with you, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, definitely. I have a website, aswewake.com. And it's a nonprofit I run, with the mission statement of creating oneness experiences and embodiment. So our work is, the integration is basically the embodiment of the oneness experiences. So aswewake.com, and I have my contact information on that website. We also, I think, are going to try to post the integration scales on a website, integrationscales.com. That's not up yet, but hopefully in the next months or so, that'll just be like an easy way for people, if they want to track their own integration, to go to that site and look at, okay, like, what am I showing up to sort of tackle? What's my intention? Whether looking at depression, joy, creation, artistic, endeavors, etc. And then looking at the integration scale and kind of tracking their progress over time. So yeah, I think that's probably the best way to get in touch.
Right on. Well, thanks, Tomas Frymann. This is, like I said, a subject that's pretty buzzy out there, so it's good to take some time to explore it. And it sounds like it's a never-ending exploration, but thank you for talking.
Yeah, and thank you for your music. I've listened to the Ram Dass album on repeat so many times and absolutely love it and everything you put out. So thank you.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. Well, thank you, Tomas, for coming on the show. And thank you for your patience in us getting this episode up. But I really appreciate it. Thank you. This song you're hearing in the background is called Morning Rada, and it is off the Burn album with my dear friend Peter Broderick. Check it out. You'll hear at the very beginning, it's sort of like Peter had to go away for the evening before, and we rented that house in Western Ireland, and he came back, and he just walked in, and I was getting all the mics set up and ready to go, and we recorded sort of our greetings in the morning with him and Rada and myself, and so that's why it ended up being called Morning Rada. But thanks for listening to the Burn album, and thanks for sharing it, anything you like, and I always appreciate the words of support and positivity. You can do that on social media or at team@eastforest.org. All right, you guys keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.